Good morning and welcome to the session. We will begin in just a few minutes. We're going to give everyone a few minutes to log in. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. For those of you just joining us, we're going to give it just a couple more minutes to give people a chance to get logged in. We don't want anyone to miss anything. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this product demonstration of HighQA PQP. I am Lisa Sterling, your host and moderator for today's session. Many of you participated in our recent 5 tips for simplifying your APQP and PPAP processes that provided a high-level overview of the topic. Due to a large amount of interest, we are holding this in-depth PPAP software demonstration today. Before we get started, I would like to mention a couple of housekeeping items. We invite you to ask questions throughout the session. You can submit them by typing into your Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available in just a few days. Before I pass the floor over to our presenter, I would like to mention that we will be hosting a PQP celebration reception the first evening of the Quality Show near Chicago, and we invite you to join us. A link to register will be included in the email being sent with the recording of today's session, so please register. I would now like to introduce you to our presenter, Chris Mendocino, VP of Product for HighQA. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris.
All right, thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us for this follow-up session. We had a good time with the last one. If you didn't see the last one, maybe you registered for it, but you didn't get a chance to log in and see it, or maybe you didn't catch it in the email, but we would definitely highly recommend that you go back and take a look at that if you missed it. We went through 5 tips for improving your PPAP processes, talking about digitizing your content, centralizing it into a centralized database, building a series of templates for standardizing your organization, and then starting to scale things up with automation and connecting your the digital thread through your entire manufacturing process, right? So everything from quoting all the way down to shipping parts out the door, quality plays some role within all of that. And so, especially when you're working with PPAP. So for those of you who are working with PPAP heavily, you're going to get a lot out of this session. But even for those of you that maybe you haven't needed to use PPAP within your standard processes today, but you have some of your customers that are talking about implementing some PPAP standards, or maybe you're looking to be able to bid on more work potentially if you were able to support PPAP requirements on different bids. So anybody in any of those situations is going to get a lot of value out of this session today. So just to give some context, what we're going to do, we're going to kind of step through the fundamentals of Inspection Manager and how we're addressing the PPAP requirements that a large number of our customers are required to work with. So PPAP used to be just primarily over on the automotive side, and it's been that way for maybe 20, 30 years. But in the last 10, 12 years or so, maybe even 15, aerospace has been starting to look more and more at PPAP and APQP, as well as medical, because we're finding that risk mitigation is not just valuable for supremely high volume production runs or high volume production runs, but also for very how do I say this? Parts that have very strict requirements. So whether they're high cost raw materials that are going into parts or very high precision, tight tolerance parts that you find in the aerospace and medical world. And so some of the best practices of PPAP with risk mitigation and project planning tend to apply very well within aerospace and medical for those reasons. So let's talk about what we're doing here to address some of that, because this isn't necessarily a class on PPAP, it's more a class of these are tools that we've built that are unprecedented in the industry to be able to help you facilitate and manage your PPAP requirements. Okay, so for those of you that are familiar with our product, you'll recognize a lot of this, but for those that aren't, I just want to give a brief overview. We're a database-driven solution. We're a full quality management system that is heavily focused on inspection and quality project management. Okay, so what that means is that we start all the way from ballooning, like what you can see here. So you have a drawing that's interactive, that we can auto balloon in one click up here. So I can just auto balloon drawings and collect all the GD&T requirements. And we can even work with 3D models. You'll see that tab right over here. I've got we're not going to talk about 3D models today, but 3D models with PMI is something that we can work with as the foundational input to our quality planning. Okay. And we would extract all of the requirements from the drawing, populate a bill of characteristics here. All right, so that's kind of the fundamentals of where Inspection Manager started and what even our most basic customers are utilizing our product for today. But there's so much more to it, and that's what we want to get into here today, is some of those more advanced aspects here. So when we're talking about PPAP and quality project planning, a huge part of that has to do with how you set up your inspection plan from an operations perspective. Okay, so one of the major or most critical aspects of what we do is we give our customers a strategic advantage because we drastically simplified the process of breaking up inspection plans into operational context. Okay, so we'll take a drawing like this with a raw bill of characteristics. So just a list of all of my inspection requirements per the design spec. And then we break those into operation steps. Okay, now this is the foundational piece to all the rest of my PPAP processes, right? So because when we start getting into PPAP, we're going to build things like a P-flow, PFMEA, control plan. We'll get into SPC analysis, and so you may have critical features at each stage of the process that you want to monitor. Okay, so just by simply, selecting a few features like this and clicking add operation, I'm able to build out this set of operations here like so. So when we build operations, this is a little beyond what a lot of other ballooning products even do. This is more akin to how maybe an ERP system would build this, but more in depth than just building a straight up routing. So what we're doing is we're actually building a unique inspection plan at this operation stage. Okay, so we've got size cut, drilling, turning, milling, finish, and these aren't intended to be specific or realistic for this part, but just for demo purposes to have some example content. Okay, so you can see I've got 2 dimensions to check here. I can go to drilling and take a look at that one. I've got a couple dimensions to check here, and so on. Now, one of the important aspects of this, right, is that I can modify any of the characteristics at this stage. Okay, so without impacting the dimension at the finished part, I can modify the nominals, the gauge category, the sampling rule, the acceptance criteria designators. I can modify anything about this. Okay, and you'll even see here, this one, I've got a critical feature and one that's set to in process check. Okay, and we even changed the balloon shape so that's recognizable on the print as something that's modified in process. Okay, so that might have an alternate characteristic. I actually think on this one, I modified it here slightly. So see the nominal here, the actual requirement and tolerancing are slightly larger than what's on the actual drawing. So this is all to be able to prep what feeds into our PFlow, FMEA, and control plan, right? Is we're able to manage our inspection requirements here on this side of the product, right? Now, here's the fundamental step, because where we're going to go is into what's called production quality planning, our PQP records tab here. So we're currently inside of a part, inside of a job instance of a part, right? So I don't just have part records, I have inspection plans and requirements at a job level, or some of you may call it a work order or production order or something to that effect. So terminology aside. So at the job level though, it's my customers ordered a particular quantity of these parts and I need to specify the exact inspection requirements in the context of a job. Okay, so that's the that's the area in the hierarchy that we're looking at right now as far as our data set. And so when we're looking at this, I've got all these operations here. One of the big things that we wanted to do as a company was start to add some automation to the PPAP process. So you'll see here when we get into the PFlows and FMEAs, and most of you are very familiar with building these forms. So you're familiar with the time it takes to actually build out all that raw content and start to define it, right? And so to populate those more quickly, if we want to just run an FMEA and have it populate a bunch of templated content, we need to have some context. So what we do is for each operation, we link it to what we call a process. Okay. All right. So in the back end of the system here, we have a whole process library that I've got some demo processes in here just to show you what they look like, but you would have all of your processes throughout your organization. Okay, so any potential operation or process that any of your parts could flow through should be mapped out in a library in here. And maybe a lot of you already have that either in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, or maybe you have it in your ERP. You've got some reference list of operations, and we can certainly import those into our system here so that you can kind of hit the ground running as you pick up some of these tools, right? So we link it to a process, and why that's important is because if at this level, if I'm just defining an op number and an op name, this is just generic to the current job that I'm in or the current part. But what I need is I need some sort of reference point that's generic or vanilla, so to speak, that has template content built into it. So that's why I link here to this process ID. Okay, so let me show you on the back end where that is. So if we come up here to the manufacturing tab, all right, and again, for those of you that aren't familiar with Inspection Manager, maybe you're seeing this for the first time, some context. The Parts and Reports tab is where we do all of our work on part and job records. And then everything else to the side of here is system level asset management or settings and rules or gauge management, things like that, right? So on the manufacturing tab here, I can manage my machine assets, work cells, part categories, and process library. Okay. So this is where I've got all of my processes laid out very nicely here. Now I've just got a few, but you may have, you may have a dozen, you may have 100, you may have 500 of these processes that you end up building, depending on the size of your shop. But the idea is if I can get my processes defined enough to where, maybe for some of you, just having a process for drilling, maybe that's enough, where you would plan for potential risks or potential failure modes here for a drilling operation. But maybe for some of you, you get even more granular than that. So maybe you have processes for like PEC drilling or deep hole drilling or what have you, right? So these can be as general or detailed as you need them to be. But the idea is I can have these processes with unique IDs where I define all of my potential failure modes and the content that goes along with them. So now I don't have to retype this stuff all the time. I don't have to work so hard to keep all of my different quality personnel spread across different teams, different departments. They can all stay on the same page because they're all working off of one system, one database, right? They're not using their own sort of tribal knowledge and their own copies of Excel spreadsheets scattered around the network share folders and such, right? They're able to just utilize one centralized library of content. Right now, the level that we're looking at right here, remember, this is the system level where it's the templatized content. I can look at like order material, and you'll see this here. I'll pull this up a little. You can see the potential failure mode. So a potential failure mode might be no material received. Okay, well, what's the effect, right? What's our severity? What's our occurrence level? What's our detection level? And so on. Now, the RPN is going to get calculated at the report level, right? And that's going to help us. And then we're going to be able to assess our combined risk over the course of these failure modes, right? So this is kind of laying the groundwork. And the first step when it comes to implementing a system like ours is setting up this process library with your content kind of built in here and starting to templatize it. Now, I'll kind of weave this in, I guess, instead of saving it for the end. But the idea of implementing a system like this, some of you might be looking at this and going, oh my gosh, that's like so much stuff that I have to build. Well, let's think about this for a second, right? Because you have to build the content one way or the other. And a lot of times you're probably doing it over and over and over again. Or at the best case scenario with, if you're using Excel for everything, which 98% of companies are using Excel to manage PPAP. Maybe you have some sort of master Excel file with all of these processes and failure modes and stuff already defined. And so you're just copying and pasting them all in. That's kind of the best case scenario you can hope for within in the Excel world, right? So you probably already built that content anyway, or you should have, right? And so this tends not to be too big of a deal or too overbearing for companies that are starting to pick up a system like ours, right? And then what we do during the implementation phase is we work with you to say, here, let's pick a couple of parts, like 1, 2, 3 part numbers, right? And we're just going to build out the FMEA content for those and start with that, right? So what are all the operations and processes that those parts flow through, right? And let's build those out, templatize that content first so we can build FMEAs for those particular parts, start there. And then on the 4th part, the 5th part, as you go, it becomes less work because you're going to see more repeat operations and processes, right? Like order material, you probably do that for 90% of your parts, right? Or you have receiving, right? Or there's an inspection first off in process, right? So there's going to be general processes that apply to a huge number of your parts. And so it becomes less work over time as you go. All right. So that is the key concept here with the process library that we want to set up. So from that, let's go back to our part record here that we are working in. I'm going to come up to my finished part and okay. All right, so from that, we've come in here. Now, just as a reminder, now that you've seen the backside of things, let's look at, one of these operations and see when I'm linking to a process, right? I'm pulling from that same list of processes that I end up linking this to. So by linking this, it's going to feed all of my reports that I run, okay? Just so we have that connection now. We've done it a couple of times. So let's look at the PQP records tab. So I've set up my inspection requirements. Now, I could either do this somewhat in parallel or kind of leading up to the building the part record out, right? I don't necessarily have to do all of the ballooning and such before I start building in my PQP records tab here. But a lot of what goes on in PQP records is dependent upon what happens at the drawing level, right? So there's some interdependency, but you don't have to do it holistically one after the other. Okay, we could get started with some of this when we're building out a new project. So what we're looking at here in this tab, here, let's focus on two primary columns here first. See, there's a title column here. There's a document instance column. So this is what we call an index. It's effectively just a project checklist of sorts for all of the documents and reports and so on that you need to compile and have approved and have signed off, completed in order to call this job complete, okay? So we think of these jobs kind of as quality projects, right? And so this is my project checklist. So think of the title column here as my requirement and the document instance column as the actual. So these are the actual reports that were generated against the requirement. I needed an FAI report. Here's my AS9102 that I built and looks kind of like this, okay? So we'll talk more about reports in just a minute here, but I want to give the full context of what's happening here at this level. So this becomes sort of your project management dashboard, so to speak, at the document level. Okay, so for those of you familiar with Inspection Manager, you're familiar with like the samples tab and what we do here, that you can see all the samples and how far they've moved through inspection, right? So I've got a few down here that have a few remaining features to check. One of them's got a failure on it, so we color code accordingly. Okay, all right, but this PQP records tab, this is all the documentation. And so I can see the submission levels for each of these items, right? So whether I should retain the document or if it needs to be submitted to the customer, okay? I can see the percentage complete, and that's based on workflows. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, so this kind of gives me a high level overview of what's going on. Okay. Now, the way these get populated, now, obviously we're into a part that's already well developed, but the way these get populated is through templates, okay? Now, these templates here, if I go to change this index, it's gonna show me my list of templates if I wanna swap them out right now, which I probably don't want to, but we'll show you this here. So I've got a few templates in my system, right? And let's look at a preview just as an example. So this is a standard new part PPAP index. These are 4 out-of-the-box templates that come with the system that you can use to get started, or these can be configured to your business processes, okay? Your business logic and the way that you work with your customers. And that, again, speaking to the implementation side of things, is something that we help you get lined up. Is we do a lot of consultation and scoping of the overall project to understand, all right, can you use any of our out-of-the-box content? Usually, most of our customers, our out-of-the-box content satisfies about 80 to 90% of what they need. And then because we have a very robust set of reports and project checklists and so on, so we typically cover about 80–90% of what our customers need. And then for the 10 to 20%, that's very unique to you and what you do, we have designers. I don't mean people, I mean products. We have like report designer products to be able to customize and configure this content for you. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. So these checklists, though, there's different report types or attachments. So you see that the design record, that's an attachment that needs to be like uploaded against the list here. Actually, in this case, the design record being the balloon drawing is actually an attachment that comes internally in the system. So that's kind of an oddball example, but you could have line items in here that are just uploads. So as an example, some of our customers, they want to have their traveler from their ERP system that's got notes and stuff marked up on it over the course of the job. At the end of that, they want to scan it in, they need to save it somewhere. So some of our customers will even upload the job traveler as a requirement. They don't submit it to the customer, but they use our PQP records as a way to manage that content over time and have all the traceability, have it all organized in one central database. Okay, so just an example of how to think about this outside the box a little bit. But there's other report types here that are signified, right? So this is one checklist. Another one would be 360 general. So even if, you know, some of you might be looking at this saying, well, I don't do PPAP on every one of my parts. Not all of my customers require it. So is this still useful to me even without PPAP? Of course, yes. So even if you're not doing full PPAP, you're still needing to manage your quality requirements, right? So you still want to have better planning around what's needed on each job. So do you need an FAI? Yes, no. Do you need a lot inspection report? Do you need a cert for this one? Do you need, you know, having some standardization around what you need on a per job basis? It's extremely helpful. And a lot of you know that, but maybe if you haven't put it in place yet, you've been thinking, man, we really got to do this. But a lot of you probably aren't getting around to it, right? And so part of the reason is you need a system like this to help you organize some of that content. So you can see here what we have. There's design record, FAI report, lot inspection report. Done. This will actually automatically add in any of the materials and special processes. I didn't really mention that early on, but you can track all the material and process requirements. That kind of goes into your overall inspection requirements. So that gets automatically appended once you bring it into the job level. Okay. So again, these are indexes, these are templates that we're looking at in our system that on each job, you pull one of these in, say, this is what I need. And maybe it covers, you know, 95% of what you need. If you need to make edits at the local level, you just come up here, say edit, and I can manage this checklist. I can right click and say, move something up and down, copy, cut, delete. I can add new items and kind of organize my project checklist here as needed, okay? And this is at the job level now. All right, so let's talk about, so this is the project checklist. This is the index that we've been going over here. Let's talk about the reports that get run. So let's see here. What do we want to go into first? Well, let's go into the FAI report, right? So the system automatically attaches the balloon drawing and attaches any material cert requirements or processes, as I mentioned up here. And then we start running our reports. Okay, so now there's some very cool automation that we can add around that, but at a base level, I run my reports for each line item. Okay, so I'm going to look at this FAI report that I have here, right? I'm just going to click that to open it. And you can see the setup that we have. Now, for those of you familiar with Inspection Manager, and maybe you've been using it for a few years, you're familiar with our existing reporting engine where we were exporting just to Excel and you could manage your reports from there. So this is a completely reimagined reporting engine that was built from the ground up. I know there's a lot of companies out there that build reporting into their product using some third-party reporting engine like Crystal Reports or something like that. We didn't do that. We built ours from the ground up because we wanted full control over the entire logic of the reports, so we can go very, very deep with how we automate them and how we manage them through the system. Okay, so, and we've done some, what I think is some very impressive work. We have a very talented development team here. So what you're seeing right here is a kind of a dynamic form inside of the product, right? We ran this FAI report, and it's something interactive now, that it's not just a static Excel or PDF. It's something that's that I can engage with in the product. It's almost like a mini application inside of Inspection Manager. And this form has its own data set, its own sort of revision history, right? So I can create revisions of this document. I can add attachments to it. It's got a workflow associated with it, and all the history of who's engaged with this form when, and so on. So if I look at history here, right, I can see anytime the workflow has been modified. I can see anytime that, if I view minor records, I can see anytime anybody's opened this even and to review it. Anytime someone sent it by email, maybe they submitted it to a customer, right? So I can see all of that content in here, that whole history of this form. Okay, so when we say going beyond Excel or going beyond Word and such, we're not just creating web application forms or something like that. We're actually creating, there's a whole tool set surrounding these forms to help you manage them better, not just have them in a nicer interface, but help you know when the due dates are, who's assigned to it, who has access to edit it and engage with the content, and which projects it's part of, right? So that's adding now to this index level to be able to see the status of each document in here, right? So I can see, I mean, how many times has this happened to you guys where a project or a job is late and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what did we need for paperwork? Okay, well, who was supposed to be taking care of that? Who signed off on what? And you review things over and over and over and over again, just because you have no centralized tools to be able to easily reference where you are at with any given project. Okay, so having this tool where I can just quickly pull up my queue of parts or jobs, I can run a quick search, say, oh, I'm looking at this job, boom, I see everything right in front of me. That's a huge advantage. Okay, now this content, the way we design these reports, again, these are completely configurable. Okay, our report designer engine that we have is extremely versatile. We can build these almost like, think about like HTML web pages almost. You can build very, it's very flexible as far as what you can do with the forms. And so this is a hybrid of database content that's being pulled into the report. So anytime we know like the part number, the name, the serial number, and so on, we know that content. So that gets pulled into the report automatically. But there's going to be lots of cases where our database doesn't necessarily have things like reason for partial FAI or checkboxes for full versus partial FAI. That's really more data that's relevant to at the report level. Okay, so we have these yellow fields that you can see here. Hopefully all of you can see that, and it's coming through well in the screen share here. But we have these yellow fields that anything yellow I can type into, right? I can add notes, I can add more context to this form. I have checkboxes here. I can have date fields that I select from. I can have a drop-down menu where, see, this is just yes or no, but I could have other options predefined into drop-down menus. So this is another part of the consultation process that when we're implementing this system with you guys, we have our out-of-the-box tools, some of which you're seeing here, some of these reports, we have our out-of-the-box tools. But because of our designers, we're able to say, what does a submission package look like for your different customers that you have? Okay, what are your requirements? And do we have any sort of gaps between our out-of-the-box tools and what you need to be able to deliver to your customer? Great. And so we build those custom forms and we say which data sets are coming in from the database, which ones you're going to custom define as a user, and so on and so forth, right? So a lot of power in what we can do with customizing these forms. Okay, so probably enough said on that. Let's keep going and look at a few more. So that was just a FAI report, just because I wanted you to understand how versatile just the standard reports are. But let's look at some of these other ones, because we were talking about PPAP, right? So let's look at a process flow document. Okay, so our P-flow. So I'll open this up. Again, this is an application form, okay? So this is my full routing that I can build in. This is a standard template that comes with the product, right? When you buy the PQP portion of it. And so I'm able to sync all of my operation steps from the drawing level. Okay, so when we were back on the drawing, we did our ballooning, we grouped everything into operations like we talked about in the beginning of the session here. When I run my P-flow, all of those operations get pulled in. But that's really only what we had there was size cut, peck drilling, turning, milling, finish. We didn't have order and receive material. We didn't have inspection and final packaging. Okay, so how did those get into our P-flow? Well, we use this button up here, add process. So when you run the P-flow, it syncs from the drawing first, and then you add the additional processes that are more peripheral to the overall routing, okay? They're not necessarily manufacturing oriented, or they don't have inspection steps in them necessarily, but they do need to be factored in when you're looking at your overall P-flow, your FMEA, and your control plan, okay? So we build that out here. Now, keep in mind, when these processes get added in, this content can be fully templatized, okay? Even the selections here, see, I can engage with the content like so if I need to make changes, but I can even resort the operations and such. But ideally, I'm doing as little interaction with these forms as possible, and we can automate it as much as possible. So when we look at, here, so if we go back to our process library, let's take a look at that real quick. Come on, there we go. All right, so back in our process library, let's look at what was one of the ones that we had. We had a drilling operation. So there's templated P-flow content, okay? I actually didn't have any template content in here, so we must have added it in the form. But there's template P-flow content here where I can add in my significant product characteristics for input and output, all right, in my classes. So I can add this content at this level, and I'm defining the process type here as well, right? So whether it's fabrication, move, store, inspection. And this is part of the AIAG standard template for this, right? For developing a P-flow. So that's all defined at the process library level. And I can also look at my templated FMEA content, which we'll look at in a second in the report. Okay, so all that stuff is templated up at the system level. And we'll look back to our PQP records here. Okay, and we're back into a specific P-flow now for this job that we've been looking at. So all this content gets built in. Anytime that I make changes to either the drawing level, or maybe I make changes at the process library level, I can sync those changes into my local form if it's something that's active and still in process that needs to be updated. Now, again, this whole document has this whole set of tools up here, so I can have revisions of this. It'll go through workflow states, right? So I have a workflow attached to this. Very, very simple workflow, just to get the point across here. These can be more sophisticated with multiple approval levels, signatures, and all kinds of stuff. But I'm just, in this one, I'm just going from draft to complete. So it shows me what my current status is for this form, and who has permissions for the different roles, right? So this, in a draft state, it's the responsibility of the QC inspector. So who is the QC inspector? So for some of you that are maybe in a smaller shop where you've just got a quality department, right? And you may have this set up so it defaults to the same person all the time as QC inspector. But some of you might have larger companies where you've got multiple different departments for different value streams throughout your organization. And so you you'll have more sophisticated templates that you set up in the background so that when you run a part under Department A and you pick a workflow, the QC inspector is the inspector for Department A, right? Versus, if you run a part under Department B, it's going to pick the appropriate QC inspector for Department B. Okay, so you can put all that logic into the system so that the user assignments and responsibilities are as automated as possible, right? Okay, so then the person responsible at this stage has an action item. In this case, it's approve, right? So that's why I see this button up here at the top of the report. Once I'm done setting it up, I can approve it, and then it's set up as complete in the system. Okay. Again, those can have multiple stages to them. There might be multiple rounds of approval. Maybe I have to escalate it to my manager, and then he sends it up to his manager, and a couple people have to sign off on it. And we support all the electronic signatures. You can even see, you can go and view signatures that have been accumulated against any document. And so all that can get accounted for. Don't worry about it. We're just keeping things simple for the demo stage today. So this is our P flow. FMEA would be next, right? So we run an FMEA here. Now the FMEA triggers off of the P flow, right? So I've got my operations that pulled in, again, the order material, receive material, size cut, etc. But this time it pulled in all of that templated content that we were talking about at the system process library. So the potential effects of failure mode, the severity, potential cause, and so on. All this content gets pulled in as soon as I run this FMEA report, right? I didn't touch this. I didn't make any changes to it. I just ran an FMEA. And because we know the operations or processes in the P flow, then we know the template content that needs to get pulled in. Now, of course, you may need to make changes at the local level, like on a per job basis. Maybe you need to make some adjustments. That's fine. You can engage with the content, you can click, you can type into it, you can adjust the severity, the occurrence, the detection levels. RPN is calculated, right? Okay, so all of that's able to be modified, right? You can even right click and say, up in here, we can say add failure modes to this if needed, just for this local level. Or maybe we learned something. Maybe we learned there's a new failure mode for this operation. And maybe we say, well, this actually applies up at the top level to any time that we order material. We always have this potential failure mode. So I can right click in here and say update the template at the system level. So that way any future job that pulls FMEA content for an order material operation pulls the latest and greatest content. Okay. So I'm able to leverage my learning forward and continuously improve my processes in a much more simplistic way, because it's all able to be, all that learning is aggregated into the centralized system. Okay, so lots of good stuff. Oh, one last thing I'll mention here on this is as I add content to any of these fields, the system remembers specific types of content that are added to any of the columns in certain reports. And so these are kind of like previous items that are used across the different processes and across the different FMEAs in all of my jobs, right? So I can start typing in here and it'll autocomplete and make recommendations for potential failure modes that I might want to use, right? Or potential effects or potential causes and so on that I might want to use based on past data that's been entered. So the system actually gets more helpful as you use it in that way. All right, very good. Let's keep going here. We're just about wrapping up on time, and then we're going to move into a Q&A section. I'm sure there's probably lots of questions going on here, so that's good. So the last one, as far as our standard PPAP and so on, would be the process control plan, right? So we can look at a control plan. Again, this is now pulling from the P flow, same as the FMEA, but it's pulling in all of the dimensional requirements per operation that we had defined back at the drawing level. So ideally, I'm not doing a lot to engage with the control plan itself as a report, ideally, all the content is getting established back at the drawing level. So like gauge categories, sampling frequencies and size and so on. All that stuff should be defined at the drawing level with those tools that we have for that. And then it gets pulled forward into the control plan. Okay, and anytime there's changes that we make back at the drawing level, I can sync those changes back here into the report. It'll actually tell me if there's been changes to either the P-flow or the drawing itself, so that it'll say, hey, this control plan is outdated. You need to sync the most recent data forward into it. Okay, so even if this is a completed control plan, maybe it's been confirmed and it's locked, that's great. You can create a revision of it and pull the latest updates into it. So maybe I'll have Rev B of the control plan for this job. Okay, and then that way you're able to continue with all of the approval steps and so on. All right, so last thing that I want to hit on real briefly, just to close some of the loop here, because we didn't really have a ton of time today to get into things like SBC control charts and so on. Here, I'll hint at one here just so you can get a rough idea of it. Here, hold on, I got a better one here, I think. No, I don't think I have a good example of it on this particular job, but that's okay. But yeah, so Gage RR, SBC, and so on, we can handle all of those as well, because any of you that are familiar with our product are familiar with the data collection tools where we're collecting inspection data from CMM equipment, any automated inspection equipment, and from manual inspections through our apps. And so all that gets aggregated into the SBC reports and lot inspection reports and so on. Okay, but one thing I want to hit on here before we wrap up the process is all this content is able to be managed. And at the end of the day, though, I have to get it to my customer, right? Or you have to get it to your customer. And so we've made that simpler as well. Obviously, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you can manage all the content in the world, but you can't get it out of the system, right? So we made it very simple to do that. So if I look at my FAI report that I have here, I can just directly send this via email to my customer, right? So if I click on this, it'll bring me up to a nice little form to be able to send this via email. Right now it's compiling this into a PDF, so it's going to pause for a second here. But I can say exactly who I'm sending this to, add any sort of text to the message. I can upload additional attachments if needed and send that off. Now, I've already done that previously, so I'll show you something here. There's an email history because this icon shows up in my index. Anytime any document has been emailed or sent out of the system, there's traceability for that, right? So I can click on this and I can see, oh, in my action history, this was sent by email on this date and time by this user, and it was sent to this email address, okay? So I have full traceability of all of that information, so that way users aren't just emailing stuff and you're saying, oh man, did I send that to so-and-so? Did I not? Who did this or that, right? You have full visibility of everything that's going on in here, okay? And then at the end of the process, we wanna build this into a final package. So all of these documents get rolled up into one aggregate PDF that you can then email that off to your customer at the end for the final submission package, okay? So, last tidbit, and then we'll move into questions, because I think this is an important piece, although, you could have another 20 minutes on this easily. But if you have questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A, queue, and we'll start getting to those in a minute here. But last thing that I wanted to hit on was beyond, if you're gonna have all of your documents inside of Inspection Manager, like we have here, like we've been talking about, you have a lot of people that are going to engage with that content beyond just the people that are using Inspection Manager. Not every person that engages with FMEAs and P-flows and FAIs and provide signatures and approvals and stuff. They don't need all of the ballooning tools necessarily that are in Inspection Manager. They just need access to the documents themselves, right? So we've provided a web-based kind of light application. We call it PQP Lite, to be able to just log into the same system. It's the same database, and view every part and job, active job in the system, and all of the document requirements for it, right? So this would be a whole queue. I've just got one part in the system right now, but this would be a queue with many jobs. And I can see all in progress or all assigned to me. I can toggle between those. And this one would be a document queue. That's all the documents across all the different active jobs that are assigned to me, ranked by their due date. So I know what is the next upcoming requirement for me personally when I log into this system, right? The system knows who I am. And then I can engage with these reports and forms just like I was doing before. So I can even open up this job and go to the job level here. I can see that same queue of all the document requirements for this job. I can open any of them up, right? I can go to my FAI report. I can engage with it exactly the same way that I did back on the desktop version of Inspection Manager, right? I have all the workflows and action steps that I can take and so on. I can engage with the balloon drawing, right? So I have all these tools that I can access even in a web application. If all I need to do is just kind of reference the content. I don't need to be a builder or a planner or something to use the kind of primary application of Inspection Manager. I just need access to the content to be able to engage with it over time. Okay. So a lot of things to cover here. Like I said, that was kind of a quick overview, but hopefully that gives you some ideas and context for this. Okay. So with that, let's pivot over to some Q&A. Okay, so as we mentioned, there is a Q&A tool within the webinar with Zoom. And so if you want to open up that Q&A, you can submit your questions through there, okay? And we can get to them accordingly.
Great, thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your expertise. As Chris mentioned, let's go ahead and get started with the Q&A. We did actually have a couple of questions coming in throughout the session, and we encourage you to keep asking questions. Okay, so the first question that came in is, do I need to have the Inspection Manager software in order to apply the PQP application?
Yes, so yeah, yes is the short answer. The reason why is because we don't build, as a company, we don't build products that are kind of independent modules kind of that are able to be purchased independent of each other. We believe in highly automated, connected systems that are able to operate in a highly automated way. So in order to do that, they kind of all come together, because PQP isn't like just having a reporting engine, which is effectively what PQP is. It's like a reporting engine with project planning and management. It's, you know, it would be useless as a standalone item if it didn't have all of the ballooning and the inspection requirements that we're feeding into it, and all the data collection that we do as well. So it's all one cohesive system that that is highly interoperable.
Okay.
Maybe I can add a quick sentence here, Chris. This is Sam Golan. Talking about integrated system, also database driven. So it's all on the same database. And if you look today into quality department, you may find between 5 to 15 different systems, including a lot of Excel. And addressing what we call quality 4.0 or industry 4.0, quality department will not be able to continue to chase as it chased for many, many years after manufacturing. And the bottleneck is growing and growing. I think that only integrated system that have it like from A to Z without the needs to get out and do other component of the process in different system, it's not scalable anymore.
Okay, thank you for adding that, Sam. And to the audience, Sam Golan is our founder and CEO of HighQA. So thank you, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for the next question, it asks, how long does the implementation take?
So the implementation, that's something that can vary. It's highly dependent on your environment, your situation, what you're looking to do with it. But you can say a general range that getting up and going with Inspection Manager could be anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, probably on the short end, up to it can be 3-4 months or so, depending on the readiness of your organization, the team that you have in place, how much changeover, because some customers are going from paper, like recording their inspection results on paper and such, and they're trying to convert that into a full system like this. Others are already using computers on the shop floor and such, typing into Excel. So a lot of times that's a slightly faster transition process. So it really depends on a lot of variables, but those are kind of the general ballpark ranges of, on the low end, with all the training and stuff to get up and going with PQP and all the reporting, learning the ballooning and such, 6 to 8 weeks, and then 3 to 4, depending on how where you're coming from. So.
Okay, sounds good. Here is another question for you. Do you have a default library out of the box?
Yes, we have a default library of template content. So what we call components here. I'll show that in the product. So the indexes I was talking about, the reports, the workflows. Up here, if we go to settings and component templates, there's an out-of-the-box library that comes with the product that you're able to use and hit the ground running with day one when you first open the system up. And then we can build and add to that library of content from there, right? So you'll end up with this library of system components where you have your application forms, your FMEA, process flow, control plan. This is for tracking material certs as well. The indexes that we provide, those are the 4 indexes we talked about earlier. Okay, so just some standard checklists to start with to get a feel for things. There's a whole variety of what we call dynamic reports. Those are those interactive style reports that we were looking at. So a couple different versions of first articles, some lot inspection reports, a few different types there, a few different kinds of SBC reports, Gage RR, part submission warrant, so on and so forth. Okay, and then we have out of the box workflows as well. So we have this is what would typically come with the system here is basic document workflow with or without a signature, and then one that maybe has an approval step. So if we look at this here, see this one's just goes from draft, it has a review stage for approve or reject, and then it'll be completed if it gets approved, right? And then this is that same one with a signature on it. So there's a few different workflows that we offer out of the box as well, again, to help you get going. This tends to be, from what we've seen, most customers have, this works very, very well for them to get started with, because you're probably not going to do a bunch of customizing workflows and configuring them until you get 6-9 months, a year down the road into using Inspection Manager, and you want to take it to that next level of automation.
And this is actually related to the previous question, the implementation, how long it takes. So many of our customers are utilizing out of the box templates, which is the 18 elements or less come from the AIG, and there are much more templates, as you saw here, comes out of the box. So that can reduce dramatically the implementation time.
Perfect. Anything else you would like to add, Sam? That actually looks like it's it for questions. We are at the top of the hour as well. So Chris, if you want to go ahead and forward the slides, and Sam, you're welcome to share any other thoughts.
Just may say something also about integrated solution. If you need to have Inspection Manager in order to have the PQP, and on top or above and all what Chris mentioned, the nice thing is when we talk about database driven solution that, integrated all those components from A to Z, there will be no redundant data entry. So whatever you do on the downstream preparation, the ballooning, inspection, planning, process inspection, tool and gauge assignment, SPC. There is nothing that you need to do later on, definitely not on the PQP, because all the data, all the requirement will be automatically propagated there. And then when you have data collection, whatever needs to be will get there through HighQA database. So there will be no redundant data entry, no copy paste, no manual inspection, actually completely paperless. Okay.
Excellent. That's perfect. We like to hear that.
That's life.
So as you see on our slide here, we are going to be in person, hooray, coming up really quickly, in fact, next week at East Tech in West Springfield, Massachusetts. The following week, we'll be at the Quality Show in Rosemont, Illinois. And as I mentioned before, or in case you joined the session a little bit later, we are hosting a cocktail reception where we will have free drinks and hors d'oeuvres that evening from 5:30 to 8:30 at the Crown Plaza, which is just right across the street from the convention center. So we encourage you to join us and hope that you can make it if you're going to already be at the Quality Show. And then following that, we will also be at West Tech out on the West Coast. So a busy couple weeks ahead, and we hope to see you all in person very soon. On the screen here, you will see some contact information. We encourage you to follow up with us with any additional questions you might have, or if you'd like to see a one-on-one demonstration, we're always able to help you do that. So, and feel free to scan that QR code that's there. It will take you over to our PQP application page within our website. Thank you so much again, Chris, for sharing your wealth of knowledge. This is an exciting application, and as many out there and customers and even the industry are calling it a game changer. So thanks again.
Yep. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you everyone for joining and sticking through the session. Hope you found it really valuable, and look forward to hearing from you guys with more follow-up questions and demo requests.
Great. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again for joining.
Thanks.